the Corporate Responsibility Association, and it brings me great pleasure to welcome all of you on the phone to our continuing webinar series. Today's webinar is titled Global Supply Chain Dynamics and the Changing Risk Management Agenda. I wanted to go through a couple of slides about the Corporate Responsibility Association. We welcome our members to this series of webinars. We want to make sure that everyone understands our mission, which is to promote the practice and profession of corporate responsibility in service of good business. The way that we do that is to educate and engage leaders at all levels to use corporate responsibility to do a few things: to reduce risk, improve operational efficiency, save money, attract talent, encourage innovation. The way that we do that are through many vehicles such as our webinar series. Our professional development is one of our value propositions, and the Professional Development Thought Leadership Council brings together ideas. We're a place to go and learn. We provide tools for benchmarking so we can define a focus on the industry. We provide networking opportunities to meet others with similar issues and concerns. We also provide a communications channel. Unlike anybody else in the field of corporate responsibility, we provide that opportunity to tell your corporate story, and we deliver unique member-to-member exchange opportunities. Speaking of thought leadership councils, we have 5. We have a ratings and rankings thought leadership council, a professional development council, diversity and inclusion, brand and reputation management, and a brand new TLC, our responsible supply chain. If you're interested in any of these opportunities, please contact me. My contact information is at the slide that will follow. Please contact me and let me know which one you'd like to engage with. We'd certainly love your attention to that. We have another webinar coming up on December 3rd. It's at noon on Wednesday, December 3rd, and the title of that is Leading Sustainable Change in Your Organization, hosted by Bart Alexander from Alexander and Associates. With that, it gives me a great opportunity and pleasure to introduce you to our host today. That is Art Stewart. He will moderate. He is a management consultant with artstewart.com and one of our CR report writers and a good friend of mine. So, Art, I'm going to have you introduce the rest of the panel. Take it away.
Thank you, Ollie, and good afternoon to all the attendees. It's very encouraging to have such a robust group of folks joining the distinguished panel we have. I'd like to welcome Tim Valco, who's the Executive Director of their Global Supply Chain at Amgen, Colin Lafferty, who is Vice President Operations of Supplier Quality Management for VWR International. VWR is also a supplier member of RX360, which is a consortium for international pharmaceutical supply chain, and Jeff Labarge, who is a partner in the food and beverage and agriculture practice at the law firm of Nixon Peabody. We have extensive bios that are available, so I will not spend time repeating that information, but you can read about in greater detail our presenters that way. So I will just take a couple of minutes before we move first into Tim's presentation. And by the way, we will be asking attendees today to participate in 2 polls. We have 2 poll questions that will solicit your responses. The first poll question we will pose to you after Tim's presentation. The second poll question we'll pose to you after Colin's presentation, and then when Jeff concludes his segment, we'll return to look at the results of both polls and open up a Q&A between our panelists and all of you, the attendees, to participate. So for just a few minutes, I want to sort of set the landscape, if I could. As you may know, this is the first of what will be a 2-part webinar on supply chain with the CRA. Part 2 will be in February. And it is principally premised upon the notion that risk management and how we calculate risk across the supply chain, regardless of what industry or market or competitive context you're operating in has changed. Risk has changed, the notion of it, how we understand it going forward. I had the opportunity in the last 2.5 years to serve as Vice President of Corporate Development for a Boston headquartered management consulting firm which focused on sustainable supply chain transformation for Fortune 500 market leaders across 8 different industries. And so that was a very interesting, very horizontal view to the very great variety of issues and dynamics that different companies are dealing with. And what we have concluded is that there are 3, we could categorize the drivers that are calculating how risk is changing into competitiveness, which is a lot about the new rules of engagement, business continuity, and reputation equity. And the competitive concerns vary widely, obviously depending on what kind of organization you are. With new rules of engagement basically producing pressure to reduce wasted asset utilization, enhance sales and operations planning, and minimize avoidable risks. Clearly, what is also going on is that most organizations regarding their supply chain are experiencing some degree of paradigm shift. It now requires a much more holistic view to managing the supply chain with an end-to-end visibility, and balancing the driving of revenue with lowering costs and getting used to a new orientation, a new way that you approach and manage supply chain issues, going from the historic cost compression and containment model to one that re-engineers business process to create value for all your stakeholders. Now, most organizations are still operating to some degree with an old school or historic model of supply chain. The old models can greatly impact component raw material access, production, distribution, and integration. Any number of subtle factors can create a ripple effect. There's an increasing restriction on companies' ability to directly control their sourcing strategy. And obviously, as we all know from what's been going on in the news over the last decade, a dramatically increasing exposure to factors such as geopolitical unrest, terrorism, natural disasters, all of which can inject fear into networks and then, of course, create a degree of uncertainty in the availability of raw materials. Many of us are, especially in the corporate responsibility space where we're constantly looking over the horizon, are advocating for a new approach to supply chain management. And part of that is collaborative partnerships. And what I saw working with the consulting firm I just came from, with clients we worked with who embraced that kind of collaborative partnership model, they were seeing that a lot of the infrastructure constraints had been relieved. They were able to reduce bottlenecks, strengthen their efficiencies, generate far greater margins and solidify their longer-term commitments and help protect revenue certainty throughout the value equation. And I suspect that our presenters today, with their own cutting-edge experience with their organizations, will touch on a variety of some of the characteristics of that new model. These questions will be available on the deck after our presentation today. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but here is a short list to help guide you with your organization as you look to have sort of a check-off of approaches to moving to a more responsible or sustainable supply chain strategy. So, prioritizing your risk factors, looking at your governance frameworks, looking at what incremental and game-changing business strategies can maximize a sustainable business model. Are you in an organization that is embracing a collaborative way of working? And if not, how do you get there? Do you have good metrics and incentives to promote big picture thinking across the enterprise? Are you cultivating a supply base where those suppliers are aligning with your value system? Are you engaging those suppliers in ongoing dialogue that supports your own innovation? Are you ensuring that your suppliers are proactively managing their total quality standards for raw materials as well as their suppliers' standards? And what steps can you take now to personally transition your sourcing organization to one that is more of a driver of value versus the historic model as being a manager of costs? And so with that comes obviously the development of internal tools and specialized knowledge. So with that, I would like to welcome Tim from Amgen, who will take over and talk about his work there.
Thank you, Art, and good afternoon to everyone, and thanks to the Corporate Responsibility Association for having the opportunity to go over Amgen's risk management program for operations. Those of you that aren't familiar with Amgen, Amgen's a biotechnology company that's headquartered in Thousand Oaks, California, and we're focused on human therapeutics. So you go to the next slide, Art. I'm going to read through this real quickly. No, I'm just kidding. This is a quick word from our lawyer. So next slide, please. So in my overview of Amgen's operations risk management program, I'm going to focus on the risk to product supply, and two specific areas within that risk that I'll look at are the continuity of product supply, which Art mentioned a few times in his introduction, and then threats to product integrity that are taken very seriously here at Amgen. I'll go over the background of these risks and then look at some of the mitigation actions we are taking at Amgen. So those in our industry are familiar with this first part, but in 2011, President Obama issued an executive order to address prescription drug shortages, and a recent study by the U.S. FDA has further highlighted that drug and medical product shortages are a significant public health issue. Between 2005 and 2010, we've had a triple increase in drug shortages in the U.S. 80% of those have involved sterile injectable products, including cancer drugs and antibiotics. 68% are attributed to problems at manufacturing facilities, logistics delays, or active pharmaceutical ingredient shortages. And similar issues to what we're seeing in the U.S. have also been experienced in Europe. The second risk to product supply that I'll cover today is product integrity and the threats to patient safety. Product integrity is vulnerable to illicit activity in all phases of the supply chain, and these activities include product theft, illegal diversion, counterfeit product, and intentional adulteration. And so we'll look at some of the risk mitigation actions we take at Amgen to address those. And next slide, Art. So at Amgen, we have a simple statement that we've used over the course of our history, and that is to serve every patient every time. It is a privilege. If our medicines are not available for patients when they need them, we're not fulfilling our mission. So ensuring dependable supply is at the heart of Amgen's social architecture, and has been. We employ a broad array of tools to manage risk to prevent drug shortages, and we've made significant investments to reduce these risks. Next slide, Art. So this is an illustration of how we describe our risk management program at Amgen, and specifically within operations at Amgen, and it's a comprehensive view. So we look at the end-to-end supply chain, and we categorize our risks and the mitigation actions for those risks into these four groups. So just kind of working left to right here, some examples of prevention and risk mitigation for product supply. One example of that is the compliance to CGMP regulations and a robust quality management system. So it's mandated by the regulations, but it also is a preventative measure in terms of product supply. Supply chain security is another preventative measure that we employ at Amgen. infrastructure investments, including equipment or facilities upgrades, so that we continue to improve on our facilities is an important component of that. And as Art mentioned, business continuity planning for all of our plants and all of our sites is something that we have a robust plan in place and that we test annually at each of our facilities. In terms of technology, Art mentioned the transparency of raw material suppliers and event monitoring. That's becoming a much bigger issue as your raw material supply network is very global today, and it's very important that you understand how different events might affect that supply chain. Greater focus on product and process characterization so that you don't have surprises when you're bringing products into your network. And then in inventory, which is a critical element of our supply chain risk management strategy, is the quantity of the material that we have in our inventories, what stage of manufacturing we're going to carry it at, so whether it be a raw material, a drug substance, a drug product, or finished goods. And then where is the material located, so the actual location of the product, so that if we have a disruption or if we have an event such as a fire or such as an earthquake or some natural disaster, we can understand what that would do to our supply network. And the fourth and final group which we look at is manufacturing network. So how do we diversify our network so that should we run into a problem due to a natural disaster or due to some interruption in our network, we have an understanding of the time it would take us to get another supply location online, the inventory that we would need to bridge to that second supply location, and a playbook that describes how we would do that. So these are the ways in which we categorize our operations risk management program at Amgen. And the primary driver for this program is it's designed to prevent supply interruptions. So next slide, Art. This description is an overview of how we look at supply chain security at Amgen. As I mentioned, the threats with supply chain security are quite diverse and developing. So we've seen increases in certain high-risk cargo theft areas in the last year or two. Illegal diversion inside and or into new regions is something that has been coming up recently. So what we look at is, again, an end-to-end view of our supply network, and then an understanding of these elements within each of those supply chain stages. So we look at the supplier relationships, we look at lot genealogy, raw material second sourcing. We have expanded raw material testing so that we could pick up an adulterated material upon our incoming inspection. In terms of the make component of the supply chain, again, with quality systems, we depend heavily on our quality systems because we manufacture in a GMP system. Serialization technology is a new advancement that we're doing to put barcoding on our individual units so that we can track and trace those across the network, the distribution network, and that requirement is actually being driven by the regulators and is rolling out in the next in 2 years. If you move into the deliver side, so cargo security, let me just finish this one up real quick. On the deliver side, cargo security, pallet and truck and carrier level, so we have SOPs and standards that we require all of our carriers to have in terms of how they're operating when they move our materials. We do distribution channel audits. We do cargo tracking technology, so within our containers and within our shipments we actually have devices so that we can monitor. So these are some examples of the mitigations we use to help address the supply chain security threats that we face in our supply chain. Next slide, Art. So another benefit that we've seen is the collaboration that we've done through RX360, and I think Colin's going to go into more detail about what is RX360, but it's a supply chain consortium that was started in 2009, and it's basically a bunch of companies that are in the same business together, looking at ways to share information and share process on how to address supply chain security risks. So what you can see on this slide is what white papers and webinars have been developed and delivered as part of RX360, and we participated in all of these actually in one form or fashion from Amgen. And so we benefited greatly from our participation, and we encourage others to do the same, because it is, we don't view protecting patients' safety as a competitive advantage. We think that we should share everything that we have with our peers so that they can benefit from what we've learned. Next slide, Art. So this is the participation that we've had with the RX360 supply chain security group. So just an example of how broad it is, the number of companies, what industry they're from, and the specific areas that we're currently working on. So upstream supply chain security, as I mentioned, cargo theft in high-risk areas. We're doing some awareness training for the Africa supply chain distribution networks for our industry. And we have a group that's working on traceability data exchange architecture, which is connected to that description that I gave earlier on product serialization. So how do you move data that's a representative of the product that you're moving across the supply chain. So next slide, Art. And so in summary, the commitment to risk management starts with the top executive, and it has to be part of a company's culture. If it isn't supported from the top, we don't think that it can be very successful within your firm. Effective prevention of drug shortages requires a holistic and multifaceted risk management strategy. You should not make it up as you go. It should be thoughtful and planned out. We think industry collaboration can help in building awareness and developing mitigation strategies. We've done a lot of that in RX360 and other groups. And it's not easy or cheap to serve every patient every time, and we understand that, and our company supports it. And the final piece is we do feel that the regulators can have a major impact on the adoption by industry of supply risk management practices, and we are seeing more collaboration and more of that as we go. So with that, I'd like to thank you again and turn the panel back over to Art for the introduction of the first poll question.
Thank you, Tim. And so we'd like to invite all of our attendees now to take a moment and respond to the first of our two poll questions. And once again, we will share the results of both polls when Jeff Labarge concludes his presentation at about 20 minutes or 1:15. So poll question number one, we'd like to get your input and your perspective by having you rank your supply chain for your current responsible business practices. And you have 5 options to respond, and please do so now. Maybe you consider it exceptional, so you are leading the business industry standard. Maybe you consider it better than most, so that is above average for your industry or market. You may consider it simply adequate but needing new approaches. You may be concerned that it's seriously inadequate and has inherent risks, or you may be concerned that it's dangerously exposed and therefore vulnerable to liabilities. So those are the 5 options for poll question number 1 that we'd like you to respond to now, if you would please. And we'll just give you about 30 seconds to do that and then move on to our next presenter. Again, we're asking you to rank your current supply chain operations for the degree in which you have employed responsible business practices. And we are going to now move on, assuming everybody that wants to has had an opportunity to select their response. And I'd like to introduce our next distinguished panelist, Colin Lafferty from VWR International. Over to you, Colin.
Great, thank you, Art. And good afternoon and good morning for some. We're also thrilled to be here and really speak about supplier management. If you could go to the next slide real quickly. So what I want to really dwell on today is really supplier management, half of it. So VWR is a distributor and of scientific products. If you can go to the next slide for me. We really have a pretty unique perspective, I think, in all what distribution can provide, and part of our really value proposition, I think, to our customers is really the fact that we have such a first a global view, you know, with 4,000 suppliers, we have 120,000 customers, so we can really see, you know, how products are performing, how suppliers are performing. That's really where I want to go with our presentation today, to really talk about supplier management aspect. We also have a very broad industry perspective. So it's pharmaceutical, life science, microelectronics customers, food and beverage, education, aerospace, to name a few. So very diverse industry, very sophisticated clients, both in the production side and some of the most sophisticated research going on in the world. So we have a very interesting client base. We also do a lot with site services, so we do stockroom management. We have 1,200 people out globally doing things like shipping and receiving for customers, or purchasing, or basic science, media preparation, things like that for customers. So we're very engaged with customers, and we see a lot of activity on many different fronts, you know, and are well engaged with customers, coming both auditing our facilities and collaborating with our suppliers alike. And it's a global distribution platform for us, so that we're not only in North America, but we're the largest scientific distributor in Europe, China, Asia-Pac. We're well represented in Brazil, Costa Rica, you know, places like that. But I thought it would be good to give you a little background on what we do for scientific distribution. Next slide, please. One of the interesting studies, I think, that was done recently by BDO Life Science, who is a consulting group, is that they really got together with top life science companies and had them rate what keeps them up at night, if you will. And obviously supply chain and vendor concerns is a really big issue, I think, especially with the global market that we're in now. As Tim was mentioning, high concerns over patient care, you know, the supply chain security, economically motivated adulteration of products that can come from, you know, many channels, and also counterfeit and social responsibility concerns. And we have all of those kind of same concerns with our suppliers. Next slide, Art. Did want to mention RX360 as well. A really interesting panel of pharmaceuticals suppliers and distributors that are really addressing industry concerns. You can go to rx360.org, and they have a really good newsletter of what they've put together in terms of industry viewpoints. And it's a good working group for our industry. It's a very complicated industry that we have. Some, you know, very large suppliers that are very sophisticated. We also have some suppliers that are very you know, the great scientists that came up with a great product, and they're struggling to bring it to market, but they don't really have the kind of supply chain sophistication that others do, and I think that's a big opportunity and challenge for all of us. But I think one of the things that we focus on, one of the things we're doing at VWR, is that really the importance of sharing information with suppliers and supplier scorecarding that we do. So obviously, scorecards are not new. You know, the automotive and aerospace, microelectronics really were driving scorecarding and supplier engagement to focus on improving both supply chain and yield, you know, for a long time. And then, you know, we've also seen someone like Walmart. Obviously, that's the a great model for what they're doing, having done for driving standardization, barcoding, all of those kinds of things in the industry. But what's important about scorecarding is the data. You know, a lot of the sophisticated scorecards that we see today are on, they're on fill rate, error rate, quarterly report, and that's about all that you see. Where we're trying to go with it is really from two perspectives. We're looking at scorecards for supply chain integration. That's more internally focused on how we get our suppliers to align with us for accuracy, fill rate, timeliness of shipment, all of those kinds of things. But another very important component is quality, how products are performing in the marketplace. And that slide I walked you through, as many customers as we have and as many suppliers, we have a very interesting view. So I can look at a product and how it's performing. We sold 30,000 of them. What's its defect rate across time? And what we're focused on doing is sharing that information with our suppliers. So we give them very sophisticated scorecards, 12 rolling months of history, and every data element that goes with it. So they can see how products are trending. If you look at quality, for example, every defect, we give them every item that was sent back as a credit memo, or any item that was freight damaged, regardless if it was their fault. It might have been that a small parcel carrier stepped on it or something, but it's looking at how that product is performing. And I think the message here is that the detail on supplier performance scorecards is, I think, a really a great thing to try and focus on with your organization. So you have a manufacturer that's happy enough to make the product. Do they really understand how that product performs in the marketplace in terms of the packaging integrity, all of those kinds of things? Next slide, please, Art. The other important aspect, I think, is managing a risk-based supplier audit program. I think the focus that we have, from a risk standpoint, is certainly our production suppliers. A production supplier would be anyone that's making products that become an ingredient, so it's a chemical that's turning a pill yellow or something like that, or it's tubing that's feeding that solution to that, making that particular product, or it's anything that touches a human it's kind of the way that we categorize it. So it's the gloves, it's the clothing, all of those kinds of things. Those are very high targets for us in terms of risk for those suppliers because of how they affect our customers. Also our VWR brand that we want to be paying attention to. So we have a risk-based supplier audit program. What I think is important, though, and I think what's really changed, is when we go out and do our supplier audits, obviously we're focusing on operations, things like that, and how the products are made. But the other major focus really is looking under the hood. We're there to look at what their capacity is, what their labeling integrity is, what their change control and security is, but most importantly, I think in the last few years, what we're really focusing on is how are they managing their suppliers? Do they have a risk-based supplier management program? Oftentimes you'll find that their supplier management is based on economics. I mean, how many dollars they sold, and it's managed in purchasing. And they're not necessarily going out and looking at their suppliers. They're not looking at the capacity. They're not looking at where they're getting raw material, things like that. So a lot of times you'll go to these manufacturers, and they're bringing in a product. They may have an ISO cert, or they're looking at the product and testing it, but they've not been to their suppliers. They've not assessed their suppliers. And we really encourage our suppliers to have a risk-based audit program. Next slide, Art. Also, crisis management is really important, I think, for these suppliers. What are their business continuity plans? How sophisticated are they? What are they doing for IS backup? Also, very important element, and that we're looking at when we're working with these suppliers. I think we also really, with the suppliers, are focusing on sustainability. What are they doing in terms of corporate governance? What are they doing to, again, manage their suppliers, and what are they doing to project that? More and more, we're finding our customers are requiring that from us. That we have our own sustainable objectives, and that we're we're pushing those down to our suppliers as well. And we kind of have an opportunity and a responsibility, I think, sometimes to help educate our suppliers on what our customers are looking for. And I think that's gone well for us. If you go to the next slide, please. So one of the things that we've done is we've established our own sustainability charter, which is a communication to our suppliers, and we ask that they come having read it and acknowledge it and send it back to us. And I think the aspects of social responsibility, things like that, they need to understand what we're requiring and also how that impacts their own organizations. And I think it's an important aspect of communication. And just a note on sustainability, once we see the fact that we've got, if you look at our facilities, we're LEED certified. We've done all the lights, we've done all the conveyor motors that shut off when no one's using them, all of those kinds of things. It's an ongoing challenge in terms of our facilities are moving to 14001. Several of them are certified now, not only in the U.S. but across Europe for environmental management. Great stuff we're doing there. But the next major thing that I think we can do for a sustainability standpoint is really engage our suppliers and really help them provide the data for them so they can cut down with the rework that they're doing, that they provide us sometimes with errors in shipments, things like that. Next slide, please. There are also different organizations out there that we participate in. PSCI, which is a pharmaceutical supply chain initiative, SEDEX, which is more focused on food, but there are organizations that will come in and certify your organization so that you can share that information with your customer base that you've been qualified by a third party. And so those are, I think, also probably valuable in the marketplace. So in summary, the scorecard data is really important. A risk-based supplier auditing program is very important. And I think we really need to challenge suppliers on their supplier management. With that, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you, Art.
Okay, Colin, thank you very much. So let us move and invite our attendees to participate in our second poll question before we move to Jeff. Poll question number 2, we would ask you now to take a moment and choose one of 5 responses that best reflect your context. The question is, rank your corporate responsibility program, your current CSR or CR program in your organization for its overall impact. And again, it's the same 5 different options to respond. Number 1, exceptional. You're leading the industry or the market standard. Number 2, it is better than most, above average for your industry or market. Number 3, you feel it's currently adequate but may need some new approaches. Number 4, you feel it's seriously inadequate and has inherent risks that you may be concerned about. And then option number 5 for your response is that you feel it's dangerously exposed, or the program or lack of it is leaving your organization dangerously exposed and vulnerable to liabilities. Please take a moment, if you will, now and respond as best you can regarding how you would rank your organization's current corporate responsibility program for its overall impact. And we'll give you about 30 seconds to do that.
While you guys are voting, I just wanted to chime in real quick that I have received your questions. They have been sent over to Art to share with the panelists, and keep sending them through. He will ask them or have the panelists reply to them during breaks or during the part of the webinar that it applies to. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. That's great. We are getting a lot of good questions. So please, if you haven't already, we'd love to have your response to poll question number 2. Please rank your corporate responsibility program for its current overall organizational impact. And with that, we are going to move on to our third distinguished panelist, Jeff Labarge, who is a partner at Nixon Peabody. Jeff, welcome.
Thanks, Art, and thanks everybody for taking the time to participate. This is a great program. I'm going to speak a bit about traceability issues in supply chain management for the food and beverage industry. Next slide, please. So traceability is important, as I think everyone knows. We don't really have the time to address all the reasons why traceability is important for supply chain management. However, two of the biggest concerns are compliance with legal and regulatory requirements and substantiating product claims. Both of those issues can have significant adverse consequences for your company, both from a financial perspective and also from a reputational perspective. Next slide. So looking at legal regulatory requirements, let's kind of look at what's ahead here. So the Food Safety and Modernization Act is probably the most sweeping reform to our food safety laws in over 70 years. The Act essentially places the responsibility for food safety onto the producers themselves. And in fact, the FDA itself has described the Act as supply chain management written into law. As part of the Food Safety Modernization Act, the FDA is mandated to study the current state of food tracing and make recommendations to Congress. So in that vein, they engaged the Institute of Food Technologists to conduct a study. The results of that study was a recommendation to the FDA that they establish a uniform set of record-keeping requirements for all FDA-regulated foods and not permit exceptions to those requirements based on risk classification. There had been some prior discussion around having different rules for what they call high-risk foods as opposed to what they categorize as low-risk foods. They also recommended that each member of the food supply chain should be required to develop, document, and exercise a product tracing plan. So as you can see, the recommendations that were made to the FDA are really putting into place some supply chain management in terms of what has to happen with tracing and what record-keeping requirements are going to be around. They also recommended that the FDA should adopt a technology platform that would allow for efficient aggregation and analysis of data that's submitted in response to a request from any regulatory officials, and that this technology platform should be accessible by other regulatory agencies in the federal and state government. Now, at this point, final recommendations haven't been made to Congress. The FDA is still considering the study, but stay tuned. We should have something here probably in the next 12 to 18 months, and it could be a pretty interesting standard that's going to be applied to the food business. The other part of what's ahead is I think we're going to see more state involvement. And what I mean by that is consumers are becoming more and more concerned with what's in their food. And we see more and more regulation or attempts at regulation of product labeling claims. In some respects, the FDA tries to take a leading role, but in others, they don't. And I think a good example of that is what's happening in the state GMO labeling law. So there's been a number of states, especially in the northeast part of the country, that have passed laws requiring the labeling of food that contain genetically modified organisms. Connecticut, Maine, and Vermont have passed laws, and in fact, Vermont's law is going to go into effect in 2016, while Connecticut and Maine, their law requires that at least 5 other adjoining states pass similar laws. So until 2 other states come into adopt those laws, you won't see anything in those states. But 26 other states have introduced bills. So it's certainly something that's on the agenda for state regulators. Now, GMO labeling laws have been defeated in some areas. We probably all know about California. And in fact, there was an initiative on the ballot earlier this month in Oregon that was also defeated. There was an ordinance that passed this November in Hawaii. Maui County actually passed an ordinance that's banning the farming of all GMO products. So that's actually being litigated as we speak. But what it's looking like is that food producers may be required to operate in a patchwork of state laws without any type of uniform standard. There's a bill pending before Congress that would actually ban these state laws and require the FDA to be the sole authority for issuing GMO labeling requirements, but that's a bill. It hasn't been passed. I think what we all know is that GMO labeling laws are here to stay. The question is whether food companies are going to have 50 standards to comply with or 1 standard. But the takeaway, I think, from both of these points is that it's very important for food companies to understand these laws, what they require, how they fit in with their supply chain management, but also how that works in with labeling claims. In the GMO context, what's defined as a GMO is very broad. The meaning really isn't readily apparent, and the risk that can come out of these things are, of course, regulatory issues, but also lawsuits from competitors or consumer groups. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about substantiating product claims. Food manufacturers have clearly realized that healthy food claims like all natural, gluten-free, organic are appealing, and customers pay more for those products. In fact, the market for gluten-free products alone was $10.5 billion in 2013, and it's predicted to increase to 48%, to $15.6 billion in 2016. So that increase in popularity is certainly going to lead to, I think, more suits. We've seen some examples of this, even very recently, with cases brought against some tortilla companies who use GMO corn in their products. And also there's been a recent settlement with a soft drink company who claimed that its juice products were all natural, and they were sued because they actually included a synthetic type of vitamin ingredient. And they settled that case out for a significant amount of money. So now we've gone through this, let's go to the next slide, please. Let's talk about some strategies for addressing traceability issues. So contract clauses are an important way to address these issues, but the key for a good contract clause is to have a very clear understanding of what's required from the particular supplier in order for the buyer to comply with legal requirements or substantiate labeling claims. If the person who is negotiating and drafting the contract doesn't understand what the label for the product looks like and what requirements are necessary to make that claim on the label, there's going to be a problem. This really can't be done in a way where contracts simply have broad, general clauses that really don't specifically address the issue. Sometimes you'll see things like a supplier will comply with applicable law or products will be free from defects. Those are nice, but they really don't get to the point. So if you want to make a particular claim on a label, for example, you need to make sure that the contract addresses what you're going to want from that supplier in order to do that, make that claim. And as an example, if you want to say that your product is all natural or GMO free, right, you need to do a couple of things. You need to determine, one, what does that mean under applicable law? You really need to clearly define that in the contract itself, so it's very clear what you're talking about. And you need to clearly explain what the supplier can and cannot do with respect to the products that it's selling to you. The other thing that's important in contract clauses is to understand what your suppliers are doing, and if you can, get commitments on that level. So you would want your supplier to only use suppliers that are producing certain types of goods or giving you certain types of warranties about the quality of those goods. And in fact, it's good if you can to obtain the right to directly inspect your suppliers yourself. Another strategy for addressing a traceability concern are through audits, inspections, samples, and notices. Now, all of these mechanisms are about transparency. They enable the buyer to understand kind of what the supplier is doing as the contract goes forward and the parties are interacting with each other. They should be taken very seriously, and they should be mechanisms that you should include in all your agreements to make sure that, you know, once you've established a good contract that provides you the protection you need to make the claims you want to make and know that you're complying with law, you know, actually understand what's happening. You know, it's the old trust but verify concept that's important. And the last important strategy is questionnaires and certificates. And these are not just paper. They help in a number of ways. First, with due diligence before engaging a supplier to have a better understanding of their practices and procedures and policies. But even after they're engaged, questionnaires and certificates can help identify that changes in product manufacturing or quality processes are detected early. and get identified. And also oftentimes these questionnaires or certificates are required to be issued by someone that may have a different role in the organization, like a CFO or CEO, for example. And having such a high-level official having to issue these certificates really acts as a double check with your supplier to make sure that they're looking at these important issues for you at all levels. So, one example that to kind of explain how a questionnaire certificate might be useful is, for example, if you have a product and you label it as organic. Well, the USDA requirements for using that term are very specified as to when you can use it, how you can use it, where you can place it on the packaging. So having a dialogue between your legal department and your procurement department to make sure that all of those issues are addressed properly in the agreement and identified in questionnaires and in fact verified in audits is very important to make sure that you can support your legal obligations or your labeling claims. So with that, I know we're running a little bit behind. I'm going to turn it back over to Art.
Thank you, Jeff. And we're going to invite a projection now, if we could, Heather, of the response to the first poll question.
Okay, so that's rank your supply chain for responsible business practices, correct?
Correct. Let's see what everybody came back with. So the largest category of response was adequate but needing new approaches, followed by better than most, above average, and we're at a tie for either exceptional or seriously inadequate. Interesting. We'll have the panelists respond to that in a moment. Let's put up the second poll question, if we could. This is asking you to rank your current corporate responsibility program for its overall organizational impact, and 37%, the number one response, better than most, above average for industry or market, followed closely behind with a ranking of adequate but needing new approaches, and then exceptional. So definitely leaning heavily on a positive perception of current corporate responsibility programs as they are maturing in their impact on our attendees' organizational effectiveness. Would any of the panelists like to respond to those two polls? Anybody?
I'm sorry, it's Colin Lafferty. I think they're very interesting to see. Actually, it's pretty encouraging. I'm sure there's a diverse group of industries on the phone in terms of what they're looking at. A lot of challenges out there, though, I think, with sub-supplier management, and I think that really has to be clearly a focus in both the industry that we're in as well as the food industry. When you're looking where all the ingredients come from, it gets to be very complicated.
Anybody else?
This is Ali again. For those that did that 11% that had an inadequate, let's get together on the phone and let's chat about what we can do at the association to try to help you bring that up a little bit, especially on your CSR reports. We've got some great people that work within the association and some great mentors that can help in that regard. So please get in touch with me if you are one of those 11% that felt that their strategy was inadequate.
Okay, if we...
This is Tim. I would just like to add that, it is difficult to quantify the benefit of a lot of the actions and activities you have to take to make improvements in this space. And I would say that it is subjective, so you need the leaders that have good business judgment to make the call on a lot of this stuff and not wait for some magical methodology to describe the benefit.
Good point. Good point. We have several questions that have been emailed in from the attendees, and we've got about 5 minutes, so let's try to squeeze in as many of these as we can with quick responses from all three of our panelists. The first question is, can each of you comment on how you identify and calculate the monetary value of your supplier sustainability programs? Anybody want to tackle that?
Kind of a difficult one. It's Colin again. I think in the industry today, certainly we rank our suppliers and their performance, and we highlight products that are environmentally preferred and very carefully, as Jeff pointed out, in terms of how we screen our suppliers. But that's kind of what our customers are looking for. And the other major factor we're seeing more and more on RFPs where companies are really requesting that from us in terms of how these suppliers and how ourselves are managing sustainability as being a clear differentiation.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Art, this is Tim. Just to add to that, at Amgen, it's a component of the scorecard that we use to gauge the performance of a supplier, but there's no, we don't do any further quantification.
Okay, then one of the other questions that has come in, do your suppliers provide feedback on how they've been able to reduce costs by working with their customers?
Colin, again, it's kind of another difficult one. I don't think we're really seeing that. I'm not sure that we're sophisticated enough in our relationships where they're pushing that information to us. I don't know, Tim, what are you seeing?
Oh, I would agree. It would be nice, I think, to say that yes, we're doing that, but I think it's not happening today very much.
I wonder if I could bring up a point that you made, Tim, and ask you all to comment about it. We've all been talking about, to varying degrees, this concept of a new model of collaboration, and certainly in what you were talking about with your work, with your various, with all of your respective organizations and or your clients, there is a strong element of collaborative relationship structure there. And Tim, you had mentioned in talking about patient safety with Amgen as not being considered a competitive advantage, that in fact the uniform call across your industry to achieve new standards of patient safety is something that's absolutely critical for the health of the whole industry. Can you comment a little bit about that process of getting that level of cooperation and collaboration around such a vital issue to your industry?
Yeah, like I had mentioned in my talk, that a lot of what we've done is through RX360, which has allowed us the flexibility to be able to speak openly about our process, because we have the right lawyers in the room to be able to have the coverage for that. So I think that was one of the first steps, is making sure that we weren't violating any policy. But once we cleared that, I think companies were very eager to share, and I don't think it's been that challenging for the participants in that consortium.
This is Colin. I would just add that it's also about having the right people in the room. So you've got really good representation from quality, supply chain. It's not just the purchasing. I think it's more the operational aspects of this that really is pretty powerful, because we're all kind of working on the same things. And obviously purchasing is engaged, but I think you also really have a different level of contact within the organizations and people being able to relate to each other.
Jeff, are you seeing a deliberate movement towards new levels of cooperation and collaboration within the food and beverage sector?
Yeah, I think there really is, especially as natural resources become less and less available. The buyers are really working with the suppliers to make sure they've got in place appropriate methodology to ensure that they're there for the next harvest season. So things like water management, soil management, and other issues like that are very important for buyers, and they really are reaching out to the suppliers and in fact choosing suppliers based upon their practices in that area.
Great. Well, it's actually 2 minutes past 1 and our time has concluded, so I'd like to thank our three panelists, Tim Valco, Colin Lafferty, and Jeff Labarge, for joining us for part 1 of this two-part webinar. As we announced earlier, part 2 will continue this topic with a little bit of a different focus. Our guests will be Joel Sutherland and Jeff Tenenbaum, and we will have a third panelist announced soon. That'll be Wednesday, February 11th, next year at 12 noon. You have the contact information here for our three panelists who invite communication from all of our attendees, and I'd like to thank Heather and Ali for all of their ongoing efforts to make the Corporate Responsibility Association such a value to all of its members and its broader constituency, and thank also again Tim, Colin, and Jeff for participating. Thanks to our attendees, and good afternoon, everyone.